That morning, the sky over Columbus was heavy and gray, as if burdened by an impending storm. The city was submerged in a cold, misty haze, making everything around seem to slow down. I, Jake Wilson, sat in my car for a long while, gripping the steering wheel without bothering to start the engine. In front of me stood the familiar 12-story glass building, the headquarters of Meridian Technologies, where I had poured nearly 2 decades of my youth, effort, and hopes. A takeout coffee from a small downtown cafe sat steaming on the cup holder, its faint aroma doing little to dispel the unease simmering inside me. I took a deep breath, reassuring myself that everything would be fine, the same way I'd been trying to convince myself for months now, ever since the first signs of trouble had begun to appear. Finally, I opened the door and stepped out, my heavy leather shoes thudding against the damp sidewalk. The sound of my footsteps echoed off the cold glass walls of the building, resonating with a lonely finality. The elevator doors slammed shut behind me. I pressed the button for the 9th floor, the home of the IT department I managed. Inside the elevator, the fluorescent lights cast a cold greenish hue on my reflection, highlighting the deep lines on my face and the fading spark in my eyes that once burned with passion. When the doors opened, I stepped into a familiar scene. Rows of desks aligned in rigid order, monitors flickering behind low partitions, the clatter of keyboards and the soft whir of printers forming a monotonous soundtrack. And there he was, Daniel, standing by my desk. Beside him was Vanessa from Human Resources, clutching a gray folder in her hands. The fake smile on Daniel's lips disappeared the moment he spoke. "Jake, we need to talk," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the basic courtesy that 2 decades of service should have earned me. I approached, nodded politely, and sat down in the worn-out swivel chair. I had known this moment would come, just not so quickly, nor so coldly. "We've decided to restructure the department," Daniel continued, avoiding my gaze. "And unfortunately, your role is no longer a fit." Vanessa extended the stack of papers toward me, her eyes betraying a hint of sympathy. I took them without a word. "You can arrange your personal belongings today. We'll be offering you a severance package," Daniel added, as if it were some grand favor. I gave a faint smile, nodded, and turned back to my desk. No complaints, no tears, only a cold emptiness spreading within me. Quietly, I packed up my things. A small family photo from a summer trip to Lake Michigan, a coffee mug with the logo of my son's favorite team, and a little cactus that had survived countless seasons of financial reporting stress with me. Around me, colleagues pretended to stay busy, but I could feel their stolen glances, the uneasy stirring in the air. A few young faces I had once mentored, guided through countless late nights troubleshooting systems, looked at me with a mix of gratitude and helplessness. Bethany, the young woman from marketing, hurried across the aisle, her light blonde hair tousled by the slight breeze from a cracked window. She stopped by me, her voice thick with anger. "Jake, they can't do this to you. You practically built everything here." I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and smiled. "It's all right, Bethany. Companies, they change. That's just how it works." With that, I slung my bag over my shoulder and headed toward the elevators. Daniel remained where he was, watching me. No handshake, no goodbye, none needed. I had long understood. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a depreciated asset, a cost to be cut. Nothing more, nothing less. The forgotten man. The elevator doors closed behind me with a dry ding. As I stepped out into the main lobby, each heavy footstep echoed across the cold marble floor. The fluorescent lights above blazed harshly, as if intent on exposing me, laying me bare in a world I had spent my entire life serving, only to now be cast aside and forgotten. I walked out of the building, where the rain had already begun to fall, each icy droplet striking my face like stinging slaps from a harsh reality. The streets of Columbus were still bustling, people rushing by, caught up in their daily routines, not one sparing a glance for the middle-aged man carrying a cardboard box. A man who had just lost everything. My old car was parked not far away. I opened the door, placed the box on the passenger seat, and slumped into the driver's seat. Resting my head against the steering wheel, I closed my eyes. A surge of emotions, dizziness, shame, anger, and pain, crashed over me like a relentless wave. I had once believed that if I worked hard, stayed honest, and gave my all, I would be recognized, protected. I had been wrong. The phone in my jacket pocket vibrated, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Emily, my wife. "Hey, how was your day?" Her warm voice came through. I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Good, honey. I'll be home earlier than usual today." "That's wonderful. Henry misses you so much. I'm getting dinner ready. Is there anything special you'd like?" I glanced out the window where the rain was falling harder now, like invisible tears from the sky. "Anything you make will be perfect," I replied. I ended the call, gripped the steering wheel tightly, and told myself I had to stay strong. Not just for me, but for my family. The beginning of doubt. The days that followed passed slowly and heavily, as if time itself could feel my disappointment. I spent most of my time in the small basement office at home, once a creative space for my personal projects. One evening, while sifting through old documents to gather material for new job applications, I accidentally stumbled upon a file I remembered submitting to Daniel a few months ago, the System Audit Report. Strangely, in this version, the figures for operational costs and the IT department's budget showed significant discrepancies compared to what I recalled submitting. There were massive expenditures listed for projects I had never been involved with or even heard about. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I opened my old laptop and logged into a backup system I had created in case I ever needed to restore data. Line after line of code appeared, familiar and reliable, like old friends. And then I found it. Internal documents, poorly encrypted, detailing suspicious payments to unknown contractors and ghost projects that had drained millions of dollars from the budget. At the bottom, the approving signature, Daniel Reynolds. My heart pounded against my chest. My hands trembled uncontrollably. The pieces in my mind began to fall into place. Daniel's coldness, the haste to push me out, the vague stories about restructuring. It wasn't that I no longer fit. I had become a threat to their secret. The choice. I sat motionless in front of the computer screen, my tired eyes fixed on the undeniable evidence. Hundreds of questions echoed in my mind. What should I do now? Stay silent, accept defeat, or confront it? I knew full well the price of challenging those in power. My career would be utterly destroyed. My family could be put at risk. But if I stayed silent, I would spend the rest of my life drowning in bitterness and regret. I thought of Bethany's disappointed eyes, the innocent trust of the younger colleagues. I thought of Henry, my son, who was still dreaming of a fair and just world. I couldn't be a coward. I decided to act. The dangerous game begins. I knew I had to be cautious. If Daniel and those behind him were cold-blooded enough to quietly force me out, they would surely have no qualms about doing far worse if they found out I held their secrets. I began to plan. Every morning, I pretended to go out for job interviews, but in truth, I spent my time at the city library, where public Wi-Fi networks helped me cover my tracks. I created fake email accounts, set up basic encryption systems to protect the data I was gathering. I reached out to an old friend, Marcus, a cybersecurity expert I had worked with back in the days when we handled government projects. I only had to say one simple sentence. Marcus, I need your help. It's something big. And he understood. Through many sleepless nights, we carefully built a plan. Gather solid evidence, verify its sources, and find a way to expose everything so that it couldn't be twisted or silenced. With every click, every line of code typed, I felt myself stepping deeper into enemy territory. Reflection. Why I had to fight. There were nights when Henry had already fallen asleep in his little bed, and I would stand quietly out on the balcony, staring into the vast night sky. The cold night wind would blow past, carrying the damp scent of grass and the faint sounds of the city. I remembered the early days when I was a young engineer, full of ideals. I had once believed that technology could change the world, that we could build transparent, fair systems where everyone had a chance to rise based on their own abilities. I recalled nights spent working until dawn, just to make sure a project met its deadline. I remembered rushed dinners with Emily and all the promises. After this project, I'll have more time. I had sacrificed too much. No, I couldn't let the truth be buried under the filth of the greedy. I owed it to myself, to my family, and to everyone who still believed in doing the right thing. I owed them the truth. The hunter becomes the hunted. A week into the secret operation, I realized I was no longer alone. While sitting in the plan of action, Marcus and I decided to accelerate the timeline. We gathered enough evidence: fake invoices, documents detailing unusual expenditures, internal emails instructing the fabrication of projects. I created an encrypted dossier, setting a password with a string of characters that only I would know. A copy was sent to Marcus, another I hid in a place no one would suspect. The hard drive in one of Henry's old toys. The plan was to deliver all the evidence to an investigative journalist, someone who had won major awards for exposing corporate corruption. I cautiously contacted her through a fake email address, using multiple layers of encryption. The meeting was set for Friday night, at an old diner on the outskirts of town. The fateful meeting. That night, it rained. I put on my raincoat and walked into the diner, where the dim yellow lights made everything look like a scene from an old movie. She was already there, sitting alone, with a cup of cold coffee in front of her. She didn't look like I had imagined. Younger, sharper, with a calm gaze as though she was already too familiar with meetings like this. I sat down and handed her a small USB drive. "It's all in there. Everything you need," I said, keeping my voice steady. She nodded and slipped it into the pocket of her coat. "Do you know that after tonight you'll have no way back?" she asked. I looked out the window, where raindrops shattered against the glass. "I know," I replied. "But there are some things that, if I don't do them, I'll never forgive myself." The price of truth. Leaving the restaurant, I walked to my car in the rain. The cold wind hit my face, and each raindrop felt like tiny needles piercing my skin. I tightened my coat around me, silently blending into the night. But I knew, from this moment on, my life would never be the same again. The retaliation. 3 days later, the first article was published. The headline appeared on the front page of major newspapers. "Massive financial scandal at EdenTech, dark secrets exposed." Immediately, EdenTech's stock plummeted. Investigations were launched. Senior leaders began dodging the media, issuing vague statements. Daniel. He could no longer remain silent. I received a call at midnight. The number was hidden. I answered, pressing the receiver to my ear. A deep, cold voice came through. "Jake, do you think you've won?" I didn't answer. "Remember this. You've started a war you can't win." The phone clicked dead. I sat there in the empty living room, the ticking of the clock the only sound. A chilling feeling crept up my spine. I knew this was just the beginning. Darkness opposing. In the next morning, I discovered that Henry was being followed when he went to school. A strange car with dark windows was circling around the school. I didn't hesitate. I picked up Henry immediately and brought him home. A surge of anger mixed with fear flooded my heart. They dared to target Henry. No matter what happened, I would protect my son. I called Marcus. He suggested that Henry and I leave the city for a while he continued to handle the information and protect the remaining evidence. We packed quickly. A small suitcase with some clothes, important documents, and a hard drive containing all the data. By dawn the next day, I was driving Henry out of the city, taking the lonely roads leading to a rural area far from prying eyes. The hideout. We took refuge in a small wooden house belonging to an old friend of Marcus, nestled in a quiet forest. Day by day, I taught Henry how to fish, set up tents, and start fires. The boy, innocent as ever, didn't realize the dangers closing in. For him, this was just another adventure with his dad. At night, when Henry was fast asleep, I sat on the porch, one hand clutching a cold cup of coffee, the other gripping a small handgun borrowed from Marcus. Every small noise in the forest made me tense. Any strange light in the night sent a chill down my spine. I was ready. If they came, I would fight to the end. A sudden counterattack. A week passed in tense silence. Then, a shocking piece of news broke. Daniel was arrested. The FBI had officially entered the scene, raiding Eden Tech's headquarters. On the evening news, I saw a picture of Daniel being led away in handcuffs, his face cold and expressionless. But I knew, deep in his eyes, there was an unending hatred directed at me. But this wasn't the end. Through Marcus, I learned that some bigger players, the ones behind Daniel, were still acting in the shadows. And they would surely not let me rest. The choice Marcus met with me on a gloomy evening as mist drifted over the path. "Jake," he said, his expression serious, "you have to disappear, not just temporarily, completely." I looked at him, feeling a heavy, invisible sorrow pressing against my chest. "What do you mean?" "There are forces you can't confront directly. If you keep showing up, you and Henry will always be targets." I remained silent for a long time. In my mind, Henry's image appeared, his innocent smile, his small hand tightly gripping mine. I understood. There was no other choice. A journey with no return. We left at dawn. The old truck roared to life, heading toward the mist-covered horizon. I didn't look back. I had left behind not just a life, but a name, a past, and friends. A new identity had been prepared. Fake documents, a bank account overseas, and a small house in a remote coastal town. Henry was still too young to understand it all. I simply told him we were starting a new adventure, in a place where no one could find us. The boy smiled brightly, unaware that behind that smile was an ocean of tears that I had to swallow. The end, or just the beginning. Now, every morning when I wake up, I see the blue sea stretching before me. Henry chases after seagulls on the sandy beach, his bare feet leaving innocent footprints. I am still alive, but I am no longer Jake Walker. I am someone else, carrying the memories of the days that have passed and the scars that will never heal. I did the right thing. I toppled a small part of a dark empire. But the price I paid was my own life. And sometimes, in the quiet of the late night, I ask myself, does justice really exist? Or is it just a fragile dream that naive people like me still cling to in hopelessness?